Hello, here is Taras Timo with yet another update from Ukraine. As I said before, I am now recording my short videos not on everyday basis because there are other things I have to do, and the events are developing maybe not so fast as in the first days of the war, but I will be updating you on major developments here on the ground. So for the time being, we are facing this kind of positional war, that there are no very rapid advancements on either side. Russian troops stopped on certain barriers, either natural ones or created by Ukrainian troops. In many cases, we are witnessing extremely poor planning of the Russian operation, because they have hit some natural barriers that were obviously there, and they had to take them into account on the level of general planning of this operation. Now we are at the beginning of the spring here. The snow has melted mostly, and rivers are broad. And it's impossible for the tanks to go over those rivers. There is a lot of mud everywhere, and our soldiers are collecting literally dozens of Russian tanks abandoned in the mud because they couldn't go further, and they are completely undamaged. I just read statistics a few hours ago that Ukrainian soldiers have recovered more tanks from those abandoned by Russians than they have lost in these 3 weeks of the war. Approximate losses of our tanks are estimated at 80 pieces, and something like over 150 have been taken over from Russians, which are not damaged and can be used by our soldiers. Obviously, this military statistics is not something very important for you, but it just shows how the war on the ground goes on here. Another fact that is quite striking is that yesterday Russians have lost 7 helicopters, which were parked on an airfield near Kherson in the south Ukraine, and our artillery shelled that place, and 7 helicopters just burned down. What is remarkable about this fact is that it happened for the 3rd time in a row. So this airfield was taken over by Russians at the beginning of the war. They put there some aviation technique, planes or helicopters. They are shelled by our artillery. Then the next day they put some more in the same place, and obviously the coordinates are well known to Ukrainian artillery, and they cover them again. In the last day, with the 7 helicopters they lost, the financial losses are estimated about $140 million. So the cost of 7 machines and some other auxiliary machines that were there. Generally, we heard very positive reports this night about advancement of our troops, especially in the northern Ukraine, north of Kyiv. There is a major offensive launched in the last 12 hours or so by the Ukrainian side, and hopefully it will be not just a small advancement but a strategic one that will help to push Russian troops at least partially away from Kyiv. Otherwise, all our cities stand firm. Those that are encircled by Russian troops or attacked still hold fast. They are sometimes in a very difficult humanitarian situation, as the city of Mariupol, that has incurred terrible losses of civilians. There are like 7,000 fighters defending this large city. Before the war it was 400,000 people plus. Nowadays they are reporting like 200,000 civilians are still trapped in the city. Some of them were able to leave the city yesterday with a column of cars that was allowed out of the city, but most of them are still there, and there are various reports about casualties among civilians ranging from a couple thousand to as many as 20,000. It's very difficult to calculate because many bodies are under the rubbles of the buildings. Medical staff doesn't have access to the wounded, and I listened to a really heartbreaking report by a medical personnel from the place there. This lady, she was just crying because she said, as a medical professional, I never was in a situation when I hear people literally screaming from the ruins of the building, but the shelling is so heavy I cannot approach them, and I cannot offer to them pain relievers or any aid, any first urgent medical aid, not to mention that I cannot save their lives with normal medical treatment because everything is bombarded. Just to give you an idea, there were like 30 heavy bombardments in 24 hours. So every hour there are planes dropping bombs on that city, and shellings by artillery and various missiles and all that. So the city basically is wiped out. Some parts of it remain, but some are just like what you see in Aleppo in Syria, and similar to that. I'll just show you a couple of pictures that caught my attention yesterday. Some of them are extremely terrible, like this one showing shelling of a city and dead bodies on the street and people just weeping over their dead. There was a very heavy hit in the city of Donetsk yesterday, with a special rocket system that is extremely damaging. So Donetsk is on the side of this separatist pseudo-republics, but the rocket was hit not by Ukrainian side, because just there is no military sense in firing into Donetsk. It's far behind the enemy's lines, and it's a city that doesn't have any military infrastructure in it. It was simply targeting civilians, and the stories that I trust by some experts and journalists say that this hit was done by the Russian side to help to mobilize civilians from Donetsk to go to fight Ukrainian soldiers in the front lines. And that's another terrible atrocity of this war, with 20 plus civilian casualties. Here is just another church near Kiev, bombarded and destroyed, a Russian Orthodox church. So the fighters of the Russian world, fighting for the rights of the Russian-speaking population and for the Russian Orthodox Church, are wiping out Russian-speaking cities with Russian-speaking population in them, including Russian Orthodox churches. There was another very heartbreaking news yesterday. This man, his name is Alexander Kislyak. He was a well-known scholar and polyglot and translator, especially translator from the classical Greek, really a colleague of mine. I didn't know him personally, but there are a few people in Ukraine who do things like that. I work with translation of classical Greek texts and Christian Greek texts, and he was one of the few people in the country who translated some important parts of Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and some other Christian and civilizational classics, and he was simply shot. It's unclear how it happened. Was it intentional? Was it unintentional? But he was shot during the fighting. He was not participating in the fight, but was just as a civilian randomly or intentionally shot by Russian troops. A very sad news, a very big loss for Ukrainian humanities and generally for our people. There are a lot of talks about possible negotiations between Ukrainian officials of lower level so far, but hopefully culminating in the top level negotiation between Zelensky and Putin personally in Jerusalem. They are preparing these talks. It's very unclear and actually very disturbing what will be the subject of these talks, because it's clear from the Ukrainian side that we are fighting just for the integrity and independence of our country, territorial integrity and factual independence. All Russian claims, all Russian demands are basically discriminatory to Ukraine. There is no one demand at this war that would be remotely justified by any measures of security of Russian state. The one that Putin is emphasizing the most, not including Ukraine into NATO, is actually not demand to Ukraine, it's demand to NATO. And he's not fighting with NATO, and the peace talks will not be held with the NATO officials, it will be with Ukraine. And as you all probably know, there is no real prospects for Ukraine to become a NATO member in 10 to 15 years at least. And there is no even active negotiations going on about joining NATO. It's simply that in the Ukrainian constitution, they recently, 2 years ago or so, introduced the norm that Ukraine is aspiring to become NATO member. That's it. And all other demands that Putin advances is like parting of Ukraine into several pieces, disarming Ukrainian army, which is obviously not going to happen under the circumstances. Even if President Zelensky would be that stupid to make this concession, of course the people and the army will not support that, and it's simply not going to happen. With these piles of bodies on our streets, it would be absurd to disarm our army. And so it's hard to say what these negotiations can lead to. They certainly are good just to keep up, because every negotiations are good because it's some kind of work on the diplomatic front that might at some point decrease the intensity of actual military actions, but otherwise all our trust goes in God, lies in God and in Ukrainian army. There is no real diplomatic solution at this point to this conflict. We are hoping for this economic sanctions to affect Russia, to soften its position, to destroy its economy, and to disable proper financing of war. We hope for the support of Western governments. It's very clear they are not going to intervene in any form. The no-fly zone I keep talking about and everyone keeps talking about seems less and less realistic, actually plain unrealistic from the side of Western governments and NATO countries. We will see how this situation develops. So far, we need prayer, we need support of every form you can offer. We badly need medical supplies, basic non-lethal military equipment, anything you can help with practically or financially, and most importantly with prayer and with pressuring on your governments, raising awareness in Western societies that we are fighting this war not only for Ukraine but for Europe and for the world is, I would say, top priority at the moment. Thank you very much, and I will keep recording these videos as much as I can for those of you who are interested in following the situation in Ukraine. Thank you very much.